Good evening. If you will, turn to number 57. All people that on earth do dwell. Sing 1, 2, and 4. All people that on earth do dwell, sing to the Lord with cheerful voice. Him serve with... No, I don't know this one. Thought I did. A little bit different. You know it? How about number 68? Lord, we come before thee now. Lord, we come before thee now. At thy feet we humbly bow. Oh, do not our suit disdain. Shall we seek thee, Lord, in vain? Shall we seek thee, Lord, in vain? Lord, on thee our souls depend. In compassion now descend. Fill our hearts with thy rich grace. Tune our lips to sing thy praise. Tune our lips to sing thy praise. Grant that all may seek and find thee, a God supremely kind. Heal the sick, the captive free. Let us all rejoice in thee. Let us all rejoice in thee. Dennis, would you open us up? Esther chapter 8. In chapter 7, Esther held her second banquet for the king and Haman. It was at this banquet that she finally agreed to tell the king what her petition would be. He had asked her 3 times, and each time he promised to give her up to half the kingdom if she would just let him know what her request was. Haman, the king's prime minister, was elated the day before, as he and no one else was invited by the queen to come and eat with herself and the king. After the banquet, he had gone home, bragged to his wife and family, and made plans at the assistance of his wife and friends to do what? Yeah, construct a gallows or a pole on which to impale Mordecai. Why? Why did he want to do this to Mordecai? What had Mordecai ever done to him? refused to bow down and reverence him. After the next morning, his plan was to go meet early with the king before anybody else, so he could be one of the first to gain audience with the king. But before he could say anything, the king asked him, "What would you do with a man whom I'm well pleased with how do you think I should honor him?" And of course, Haman immediately thought what? Yeah, it has to be me. It couldn't be anybody else that he's pleased with and want to honor. So he told him what he thinks the king should do. And, deck him out in the king's clothing, allow the man to wear the king's crown and ride the king's horse through town. And what else? Have a herald go before him, pronouncing him to the town. Well, the king thought that was great, didn't he? And so he instructs Haman, go do this for Mordecai. I can just see his jaw drop, After this, in shame, he went home to inform his wife and friends what had happened. And while he was yet speaking, the king's servants came to take him to the banquet of the queen. And Esther has now intrigued the king enough that he's ready to hear just what this petition is. You've been holding me off for the last few days. And she tells him what her request is. And he's in shock when he hears it. And what does he do? He doesn't say a thing, does he? He just gets up and goes out into the palace garden. He's got to think this through and figure out what needs to be done. Upon his returning, what does he find? Finds Haman on the queen's couch, pleading for his life. And of course, the king thinks there's something else going on here. And he's immediately taken away and tried and found guilty and then impaled on his own stake. With Haman now dead, and we might assume maybe even his wife and some of his friends as well, because they were part of this whole plot, things are going to get a lot better for the Jewish people now. As we see in chapter 8, beginning in verse 1. On that day, what day? See, Janie's been paying attention. That day. Did the king Azarias give the house of Haman, the Jews' enemy, unto Esther the queen? And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was unto her. And the king took off his ring, which he had taken from Haman, gave it unto Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. Esther spake yet again before the king, and fell down at his feet, besought him with tears to put away the mischief of Haman the Agagite, and his device that he had devised against the Jews. Then the king held out to Esther the golden scepter. What does that mean? is holding out the golden scepter. Has his approval to ask anything that you want. Yeah. So Esther arose, stood before the king, and she said, "If it please the king, and I have found favor in his sight, and the thing seem right before the king, and I be pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to reverse the letters devised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews that are in all the king's provinces. For how can I endure to see the evil that shall come upon my people? Or how can I endure to see the destruction of my kindred?" Then the king Ahasuerus said unto Esther the queen and to Mordecai the Jew, "Behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and him they have hanged upon the gallows, because he laid his hand upon the Jews. Write ye also to the Jews, as it pleases you, in the king's name, seal it with the king's ring. For the writing which is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's ring, may no man reverse." So here we find a perfect example of what pride will do. Pride being brought low and the humble exalted. In God's providence, the Jewish people are spared. Not yet, though. But they will be. So that God's plan and promise to Abraham can be fulfilled. Luke 18:14. Now, as often the case in the ancient world, that officials of the king's court, when falling out of favor with the king, would lose everything. Sometimes even their life. But most of the time they lose all their property and become outcasts in the community. And maybe if that were the case today, our representatives would be more careful. I mean, to go into office and make millions of dollars and to lose all that. King Xerxes took the property of Haman, which included his house, gave it to Esther to do whatever she pleased with it, which included any servants, furniture, treasures, anything, everything. Haman now becomes known only as the Jews' enemy. The fears and tears of the Jewish people concerning their future destruction is now about to be turned to victory and rejoicing. Haman the traitor had been killed. All his property has been given to Esther to add to the allowance that the king already gave to her. Mordecai is advanced to the position once held by Haman. Even though he and Esther have admitted their heritage, now the king knows that they're both Jews. Didn't seem to faze the king at all. But further caused him to realize the wealth that he had with the Jewish people. Mordecai is being paraded through the streets of the city with Haman heralding his name was but a brief procession of honor. Now he had a more durable and gainful means of honor as the new prime minister of the king and living in Haman's house. He who had been a humble servant to the king, uncle to Esther, who had no ambitions like Haman did, concealed his relationship with the king, with the queen, never took advantage of when he saved the king from assassination, but now is brought before the king and introduced as Esther's uncle. Finds the king for the sake of his wife, delighting in Mordecai, honoring him with the royal ring once worn by Haman. This man had not only saved the king's life from a conspiracy to assassinate him, but also saved the wife of his queen from Haman's conspiracy. All trust and power of the king had been given to Haman is now transferred to Mordecai. He now was a trusted confidant and agent of the king. And despite all that is done here, the Jews are still in great peril, as Haman's edict in the name of the king, remember he sealed it with the king's ring, has not been revoked. It's still valid. And this was something unforeseen by Esther and Mordecai, that no word of the king, no decree could be revoked. It couldn't be recalled. Not even the king could revoke his own decrees. They stood forever, as we see in verse 8. So after Esther pleads with the king to stop Haman's decree, notice she didn't say the king's decree, she said Haman's, possibly giving the king an out. Oh, okay, this is Haman's, it's not mine. But he didn't, because he knew it was sealed with his ring, therefore it was his decree. So after Esther pleads with the king to stop this decree, he informs her and Mordecai, who now has the signet ring of the king, that this seal authorizes any decree that Mordecai now chooses to be made law, just as it was when it was in Haman's power. So in other words, Mordecai could amend the decree, but neither he nor the king could revoke. Just kind of like our Constitution, we can go amend it, we can make amendments. And really, I guess that's not what they're doing. What the king's saying is you can make your own decree. Okay? It'd be a separate decree from the one that Haman made. And he said, surely you can come up with something that would help save your people without retracting my words, while at the same time not violating the great principles of Persian law. And that's exactly what Mordecai did, as we see in verse 9 to 17. Verse 9, then when the king's scribes called, then were the king's scribes called at that time, in the 3rd month Sivan, on the 23rd day thereof. It was written according to all that Mordecai commanded unto the Jews, to the satraps, to the governors, to the princes of the provinces, which are from India unto Ethiopia, 127 provinces, unto every province according to the writing thereof, and unto every people after their language, to the Jews according to their writing and according to their language. And he wrote the name of King Ahasuerus, and sealed it with the king's ring, sent letters by post on horseback, riding on swift steeds that were used in the king's service, bred of the stud, wherein the king granted the Jews that were in every city to gather themselves together, to stand for their life, to destroy, to slay, to cause to perish all the power of the people and province that would assault them, their little ones and women, and to take the spoil of them for a prey. Upon one day in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, namely upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar. A copy of the writing that the decree should be given out in every province was published unto all the peoples, and the Jews should be ready against that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. So the posts that rode upon swift steeds that were used in the king's service went out, being hastened and pressed on by the king's commandment. And the decree was given out in Shushan the palace. Mordecai went forth from the presence of the king in royal apparel of blue and white, and with a great crown of gold, with a robe of fine linen and purple. And the city of Shushan shouted and was glad. The Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor. And in every province, in every city, whithersoever the king's commandment and his decree came, the Jews had gladness and joy, a feast and a good day. And many from among the peoples of the land became Jews, for the fear of the Jews was fallen upon them. So on the 23rd day of the 3rd month, Mordecai had the king's scribes write down this decree that would save the Jewish people. The month Sivan was a Babylonian name for the month that they dedicated to their moon god. It corresponded to the latter part of our May, month of May, and to the early part of our June. Here he saw a means of reconciling the king's decree with the safety of his people. The Jews would be allowed to protect themselves against those who initiate Haman's decree to wipe them out. So Mordecai's decree basically called upon the Jewish people to rise up and resist the Persian government. Esther chapter 9, verse 3. Like Haman's decree, Mordecai's was copied, distributed throughout the kingdom, posted on town bulletin boards for everybody to see and read. All 127 provinces, from Ethiopia to India, to all people after their own language. To the satraps, governors, and princes thereof. What's a satrap? Well, it's a Persian word. Well, it comes from a Persian word, let me put it that way, that I'm not even going to try to pronounce. And it means guardian of the realm. This was a form of Persian government. Okay, Persia and Media. Satraps were governors of the province. So there'd be one satrap for each of the 127 provinces, who were given by the king complete authority over it, authority to tax the people, authority to make judgments, authority to punish crimes. But there was a checks and balance system to prevent these satraps from getting too proud and thinking that they can take over the empire, to try to overthrow it. Which they did. When the next king, Darius, came into power, he changed the system, gave the satraps a little bit more leeway, and they took advantage of that and gave the Darius a lot of problem because of it. But it continued, it still continued until Alexander the Great. When he came in and took over the empire, he got rid of that. Only the king had the power. He's not going to give it to anybody else. Part of the checks and balances was once a year a royal secretary would visit the satraps to monitor their work. And there were also a committee that would kind of oversee throughout the year as well and report to the king. So the satraps and governors are really one and the same thing. It's just a way of identifying the satraps as that they were governors. There would be just a little less than 9 months left for the Jewish people to begin gathering whatever instruments that they wanted to use or they felt they needed to be able to defend themselves. Not only would they be allowed to defend themselves, but they'd be allowed to plunder the goods of those that they killed. And while it may seem good that the king's words could not be revoked, I mean, think about that for a moment. What does that say about the Persians? Kind of showed arrogance, didn't it? That they could never be wrong about anything. That, so what's the point in revoking it? Because I'm not going to be wrong about it. Only God is never wrong. Only God's words can never be added to or subtracted from. Deuteronomy 4, verse 2. This principle also reveals an absurdity that none of the king's edicts could be repealed, could be revoked, while allowing at the same time an additional edict that counters the first. I mean, think about this for a minute. On the one hand, the Persians have been given a decree to destroy all the Jews on the 13th day of the 12th month. While at the same time, the Jews are now instructed to defend themselves. So you've got all this chaos going on in the kingdom. Persian government fighting against the Jews defending themselves and against the Persian government. I mean, just think of the upheaval in the kingdom on that one day. Yet both sides have taken up arms against each other by the authority of the king. Mordecai's decree was sent out with all speed by the swiftest horses. And remember, it's only been a few days since Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate in sackcloth and ashes. It hadn't been that long. And now we find him arrayed in royal apparel of blue and white and purple, with the gold crown, all marks of the king's favor, as well as what else? What else is that a mark of? God's providence. God had his hand in it. The city of Shushan was the capital, was overjoyed with the advancement of Mordecai because they viewed it as better times are ahead than they were under Haman. The Jews also were joyful. Verse 16 says they had light and gladness. And the word light is a metaphor for joy. Now, like Mordecai only days earlier, dressed in sackcloth, the Jewish people right alongside him, dressed in sackcloth, praying to God for his help. I mean, they're all under the same dark cloud. But now, they're all joyful. They're glad. They're at the honor and feasting. They had become like those that dream and then have their mouth filled with laughter. Psalm 126, verse 1 and 2. One interesting turn of events concerns the Persians themselves. Anybody remember what that is? Those who had embraced idolatries to prevent themselves from being slain by the Jews, do what? They proselyte to the Jewish religion. They become Jews. They renounce their idolatry and they begin worshiping the one true living God. As when the Jews of the land had joy and gladness, it says that's when this occurred. But it was not that alone. It wasn't just the joy and gladness of the Jews. What else was it? It was fear of the Jews, as they've been given authority to protect themselves. Once again, as Jehovah has shown to idolaters in Isaiah chapter 42 to 44, that his predictions come true while your false gods predict nothing. Nothing that they've ever said or done has come true. Yet that's what we have here. Zechariah chapter 8, verse 23, thus saith Jehovah of hosts, in those days it shall come to pass that 10 men shall take hold of all the languages of the nations, even shall take hold of the skirt of them that is a Jew, saying, we go with you, for we have heard that God is with you. So that prophecy is going to be fulfilled here, with the Persians turning to God. It's written of the Israelites that there's no people like them whose Jehovah has not saved them or been a shield of help. Deuteronomy 33, verse 29. But it wasn't just the Persians that converted. It was most likely people from other lands as well, other lands that they had taken, had defeated, and become part of that empire. As we said, 127 provinces from Ethiopia all the way to India, all according to their language. Now it was also during this time, well, it was really before, in the Babylonian captivity. Anybody recall what happened with the Jews during that time, that 70 years? It's when synagogues were invented during the Babylonian captivity. I mean, they didn't have a place to worship God. They couldn't travel down to Jerusalem Jerusalem was destroyed, was no temple. So they had to have a place to be able to worship God. Those faithful who were still following God. And all this was to prepare the way for the preaching of the gospel to all nations. Alexander the Great would introduce what? Universal language, Greek. He'd make all the empire, his empire had to speak Greek. So that's why the New Testament is in Greek, because it was the universal language then. The Romans would build roads to make travel easy, plus allow freedom of religion. But it was Nebuchadnezzar who was responsible for the Jewish synagogues. God's providence has been busy during this time, making all the pieces of the puzzle fall into place for the arrival of the Messiah. Polytheism is about to be wiped out as well. Even though monotheism of false gods is going to continue with the heathen, the Jews had returned to Jerusalem. The walls of the city had been built, as well as the temple being built. The law restored. The Jews no longer worship idols, and are blessed by God for doing so. And the Gentiles are beginning to see a difference in the Jews and their God, which was the intention of God in the first place, that God's chosen would be that difference, causing people to want to come to him, and why the temple was built for all people of the world, not just the Jews. Any questions? Thoughts? Blanks? On the paper, not in your mind. Although I have several of those a lot.
You would please place your hymn book marker at number 310, 310. That song's title is Why Keep Jesus Waiting? Again, number 310. Two weeks ago, we spent a few minutes talking about angels, messengers, So I wanted to continue that for just a few minutes. We talked about how often this word angel or angels in singular plural, like in most translations, there's like 300 times or so that one of those two words, when combined for a total, would be 300 roughly in number. And that the word itself is an anglicized form of a Greek word, which is probably pronounced something like angelos, maybe like Los Angelos or Los Angeles, which makes me wonder how long before Hollywood appeared that the idea of the city of angels came about as a title for a city that is far from being holy in nature. But anyway, we talked about the word, the meaning of the word. That is to bring tidings, a messenger again, especially pertaining to an angel. And that the word is used in multiple ways, and we had sort of mentioned that at least last or 2 weeks ago. We had looked in the book of Revelation. Of course, we've been looking at the word angel appearing in the book of Revelation, especially in chapters 2, 3, in that section with the 7 churches of Asia. And we've been noticing the 7 golden lampstands, which represent the 7 churches, but also the 7 stars there are the angels of the 7 churches, as found in Revelation chapter 1, verse 20. Let's go ahead then and think about the fact that the word angel or messenger is associated with other ideas, other than maybe the first thing that pops in our mind when we hear the word angel, as associated with God, a holy creature that God has made, that kind of thought. But also that word is associated with evil in the case of Psalm 78, verse 49. It's associated with the devil in the case of Matthew 25, verse 41. So angel is also associated, of course, with God himself, as in the phrase angels of God in Genesis chapter 32, verse 1, and the Son of Man in Matthew chapter 13, verse 41. But finally, I'd like for us to notice briefly the Bible phrase, angel of the Lord. Angel of the Lord. Several verses in the Old Testament mention the angel of the Lord, or if you're reading from the American Standard Version, it may say the angel of Jehovah. This being that we read about in various places seems to be very unique and not like other references to heavenly messengers referred to as angels, but some being that is indeed unique. It seems to be in we might say, a separate class or category when that phrase is used. Read with me from Genesis chapter 16, verse 10, please. There it says, "Then the angel of the Lord said to her in this case being Hagar, Sarai's wife, Sarai's maid, I will multiply your descendants exceedingly so that they shall not be counted for multitude." So the angel of the Lord promised to multiply Hagar's seed. The psalmist writes in Psalm 34, verses 7 through 9, "The angel of the Lord encamps all around those who fear him and delivers them. Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the man who trusts in him. Oh, fear the Lord, you his saints. There is no want to those who fear him." Then in the 22nd chapter of the book of Genesis, verses 15 and 16, we find, "And the angel of Jehovah," this is reading from the American Standard Version, "and the angel of Jehovah called unto